Welcome back to another mini episode. It's been a long time since I've done a mini episode on the podcast. I'm David Chambers. I'm your host of the Authentic Man podcast, and I do these mini episodes because I like to create bite-sized content for people, because sometimes we don't have an hour and a half to listen to me and wonderful guests talking about something. So this week I'm going to talk about an episode that I listened to yesterday while I was sitting on the beach where I live in Madeira, from the Diary of the CEO podcast, which is a podcast I love, actually. I really like listening to. Stephen Bartlett has some wonderful guests. And the guest he had on this time round, where I listened to, was Chris Williamson. He's someone I followed on Instagram for a while, and I'm kind of torn on his content a little bit. I think some of the statistics he quotes are very true, because they're statistics. I can't necessarily refute the truthfulness of them. I think sometimes his focus, especially when it comes to dating and mating and relating, is often focused on financials, money and status, which do play a part in dating and relating. I think we'd be stupid not to be honest about that, because it does. But in this particular episode, I think he talks a lot about women's success and how, and maybe this isn't what he means to do, but this is how it comes across, is that women's success and how women are improving, and they're wanting more from a relationship, wanting more from a man in comparison to generations in the past, is causing them to be single and lonely. And then, he quotes some statistic about, 45% of women are likely to be, single and lonely at a certain age. So the reason why I'm doing this episode is because I listened to it and I thought, this would be some interesting things. He throws out some good stats. I'm going to start off with some of those. Like, he says something about 50% of men feel they have zero close friends that they can go to, right? Which is an important stat because it causes loneliness, and loneliness is actually really bad for your health on multiple levels. He talks about a stat around 30% of men haven't had sex in a year. Which is quite a large number. That's, almost a third. Another stat he pulled out is like 50% of men aren't seeking any sort of relationships at all, whether that's casual or serious or just purely sexual. They have just kind of checked out of the kind of dating game as well. And he also throws in a stat that projected forward, it's like 80% of women who, actually no, it's not projected forward. He says 80% of women who don't have children, it wasn't their intention. Either I think 10% of women who are unable to have children biologically, and then what was the other 10%? I really can't remember now. But it's like and then another 10% who intentionally decide not to have children. But 80% of women who are childless, it's not something they choose. The podcast episode as a whole, there's some really beautiful bits at the beginning. Like the first 45 minutes, Chris's story and stuff like that is really important. You get a lot of good nuggets. He talks a lot about sacrifice and like choosing the thing you sacrifice, that you can't have everything you want. You can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want, which I think is a really important thing to talk about. He talks about discipline and motivation, which I'm really big on with my clients. We rely on motivation far too much to create discipline. You don't need that. You just need to keep your word. The things that I kind of take umbrage with in the podcast episode is around when he starts talking about dating and mating, of what was often kind of commonly called in the world, right? How people meet. He talks about the societal expectation for now that women are doing so much better in their education and financially. They don't necessarily need a man. So they're far more likely now to desire a man who has equal or above education, or is equal with them financially, or above. Now, a lot of men, he also talks about something called hypergamy, which is like basically that women are always trying to date up, which I think is a really simplified idea of the dating world. I think obviously in some cultures and in some situations, like if you were in a third world, for instance, you could totally understand why as a woman, you're going to want to have children with a man whose education is better than your own and so forth, because you want to ensure that your bloodline is going to improve. But for say a New York, LA, London businesswoman who is, in her mid-30s, she may not actually care so much about the financials, the man she's meeting. She may care far more about his ability to be emotionally connected, his kindness, his level of self-awareness, and so forth. So that's one of the things that I always said in there as well. I feel like he blames dating apps for the culture of dating. And I think a lot of people do this, right? A lot of people blame dating apps for the culture of dating. That app is just a non-emotional tool. It is the people on the apps that create the culture, right? We have to be responsible for how we've created this culture of dating where we're all super judgmental, right? We see someone's photo, we see a bio, and we judge them heavily, right? That's something I definitely see with my own clients and with the female clients I work with as well. Not really giving people a chance, like writing people off very quickly, being really reactive to people. Like you send someone a message, they don't reply, and then you suddenly like, oh, they haven't replied in an hour. Like, oh, they must not like me. That's reactive. Like people have lives, they're busy. I think one of the things that he says around high value men having lots of options and they can sometimes end up treating women badly, I'd say that's true. Not always true, obviously, because like I look at myself and say at times in my life, I feel like I haven't always treated women great. I'll be really honest. And I always had, mostly good options. Once I got good at dating, I learned the kind of mechanics and how to be emotionally connected and be fun and playful and create great experiences. But obviously it's not always true. But there's also something I see a lot in dating is that a lot of our opinions about dating are not formed from our experiences of actually dating, but formed of the narrative that we hear about dating. Like the narrative that everyone's often saying is how hard it is and how horrible it is and how no one wants to be serious and no one wants to be committed in a dating world. And I'm going to tell you, like, that's not a truth. That's just lots of people's opinions, and it's an easy narrative to spin because then you have no responsibility for your own changes and so forth, right? I think it's really important to note that during the episode, Chris makes it very clear that we should not try and roll back women's advances, right? To kind of help men. It's very clear he doesn't believe that's the solution, but he doesn't provide many solutions in the dating world to help men, to lift men up. Like Stephen tries to ask him a couple of times, like, what can we do to improve this? And he a couple of times he kind of goes, oh, I don't really know. And I found that kind of odd for someone who speaks about this topic quite a lot and says he's very curious. So if you were really curious, you might start getting curious about solutions, right? And might have some. Like he didn't really have that many solutions per se. One of his solutions, which I think is a really fair one, is that we need to stop this adversarial nature that is talked about in dating. When we say that, it's just like men against women. There's the kind of all men are trash, all men are dangerous narrative that goes around. And the narrative for men is like, feminism's ruining men, women hate men, women don't want, average men, they all want high top end men type of thing. Like these narratives kind of pit men and women against each other. And I tell you might just think, oh, that doesn't affect me so much. But like I work with men, I work with women, and I've seen when I talk to them and when I coach them, we get to some of their ideas and beliefs about dating and they almost go into their dates as if it's battle. Like they need to battle the person they're with. And it's a terrible, terrible mindset to go into dating with, right? So I really agree, this man hating and woman hating, blaming women for all men's problems and blaming men for all women's problems doesn't help dating. It doesn't help relationships. It's actually moving us further apart. And it's probably one of the biggest problems, I think, in dating, in my opinion. Dating is shit for everybody, right? It's not a competition, right? Dating can be hard for men and dating can be hard for women, right? It's a really simple thing and it's not a competition. It's a bit like when we talk about trauma. It's not a trauma competition, it's whose trauma is the worst and then everyone else has to shut up and bow down to them. It's very relative. Like everything's very relative for people. He says that, it's important, Chris says, that it's very important to bring men up without bringing women down, which is true. I can't agree with that more. But he doesn't really say how we can have more eligible men. Like continually, right? He doesn't talk about this at all. He's like, doesn't really know. Well, one of the obvious things is actually making education, and this is like a worldwide thing, potentially countrywide. Is like, how can we make education more engaging to young boys, right? As a thing in general, because it's not benefiting society if we've got hordes and large groups of young men who end up being uneducated, don't go through the schooling system, don't want to work, want to just sit around and smoke weed and watch porn all the time, right? That's something he also talks about in the episode. High number of men sitting around smoking weed, watching porn or playing video games. So I think that's a big one, is like, how can we help boys engage in education in a way that feels like interesting and fun for them? You know, that's a big question for schooling. And I've recently done some work by going into schools and doing talks. And it's something for the education system to think about. And it's difficult because schools are very stretched. They don't get enough money and so forth. So, you know, how can we get boys to be engaging in the education system more? I think another thing that's like a long-term plan for boys and men is like getting them more into social clubs. You know, like when I was a kid, I played cricket all through the summer. I was in a football team as well. I did athletics, which was like, you know, a really great sport for me to do alone. Like, how can we get boys into situations where they're interacting with each other, but they're also interacting in a way that supports each other? So that might be things like Boy Scouts, you know, where they're with an elder, someone who, you know, helps and teaches them, but also they're interacting with each other, trying to get things done. Because a biggest lack I see in men is socially being able to have conversations, being able to relate to other people, being able to be curious about other people, and be not all consumed by their own anxiety and fear. And I think I definitely got a lot of benefit socially from you know, being in a family of multiple kids, but also having all these sports clubs. And it doesn't have to be around sport, right? It could be debating, it could be chess club, it could be book clubs. It's just like, well, how can we get kids off computers more? I'm not saying computers are bad, but like into socializing a bit more. I think this is something I do with my clients, is get them socializing more, and it makes a massive, massive difference. One of my other umbrages about what Chris says is I think he has a massive oversight, is that he doesn't talk about dating at all as an emotional process. Like, he talks about it from a financial point of view, like, you know, women want a man, educational and financial, women want a man who's equal. But what about women wanting a man who is emotionally equal, right? Who's able to hold a relationship emotionally? Because really, why do we date people? Because we like them. Why do we marry people often? Because we fall in love with them. We don't marry people on average in most Western cultures, basically purely on money, right? We wouldn't marry someone who's unkind and horrible just for the money. That happens very, very rarely, right? We will want someone who is kind and decent and we can talk to and we can get along with and have fun with. And I think that's where a lot of men are lacking, is the emotional aspects, the social aspects of dating, right? There's a lot of fear for men, and they're not able to move past that and be social. And I guess this is the work I do. So this is why I know, you know, so much about it, because it's really, you know, inside of what I do. One of the other points he raises is about how the kind of impacts of Me Too. You know, Me Too really was looking at men in high positions of power who abuse their power. You know, the Harvey Weinsteins, and there's an American actor I can't think of for some reason, and he was abusing lots of young boys and had done all through his career for some reason. Kevin Spacey is another example. What it wasn't about, in my opinion, and I've got a podcast episode about that, about what you know, how men can survive Me Too. If you're interested in that, you can go. It's one of the older ones. It wasn't about like demonizing the regular man on the street who might, you know, approach a girl in the coffee shop and go, hey. And I think that it's been kind of blown out of proportion. I think in the media and men as well have been like, oh, everything, you know, just approaching a woman is toxic. And it really isn't. You know, like I did a poll not too long ago on my Instagram, and I think like 60 or 70% of women would be perfectly happy for a man to approach them in the street if he did so with a level of empathy and understanding, and it was like, you know, in the middle of the day and it wasn't down a dark alley, and he was, you know, he was trying to be charming and interesting and ask for a number and be kind about it, right? And this is something I see with my clients. Like, some of my clients have met like girlfriends and women they've dated in coffee shops, in supermarkets, and all sorts of things. Women really want men to approach them, right? And they're not assuming it's always going to be toxic. But he does voice this, and I see his point, and I think there's an element we have to acknowledge that, like, men have become really scared, because they're not used to socializing so more as much as they may have used to, because we used to do more outdoor in-person activities than we do now. That's bars, because that was the only way to date people. You didn't have online dating, 15, 20 years ago, or not at the levels it is now. So I think there's an added level of fear and lack of confidence because men aren't, on average, getting that practice. And obviously, when I say men, I don't mean all men. There's plenty of men out there who are happily dating and got plenty of confidence. But there's still a lot of men who are struggling with anxiety and fear and avoidance that stops them from even speaking to women. So there's an important part there, but there's also, and I feel this, and I can never really articulate this in a way that's great, and I mean this with all the good intention in the world. I think a lot of the narratives around men create a mindset for a lot of women that all men are dangerous, and that they have to be careful of men's constant toxic behavior in the dating world, or especially being approached in a bar or even in the street or in a shop. And I do feel that this has made a difference to women. I've talked to women I know actually, and they've told me exactly this. This narrative of men being toxic all the time, men being, dangerous and rapists and murderers. It's one of those things that the risk of it, and I totally understand this, the risk of meeting a man who is a rapist, the risk might be low, but the impact is extremely high, extremely life-changingly high and horrible. So it's understandable that you might think of something that's low risk and think about it a lot, and disproportionately worry about the impact, right? That's totally understandable, but it does have an impact on dating, in my opinion, right? That's my first thing. I think one of the things he talks about is how we're sanitizing the world. We're sanitizing dating in particular, and we're trying to avoid rejection. We're creating a situation where online dating removes momentary rejection. It removes that I got rejected by walking up to a woman in a bar by shielding you behind an app, right? And that's all well and good, but what it's creating for a lot of men who aren't getting as many matches as they'd like is this: they've no longer getting that momentary rejection, but what they're now feeling is like a deeper sense of something is wrong with them, like shame. They feel like they're broken, they're not good enough, and that's actually a far worse feeling to have. You'd far better to have a couple of momentary rejections in a bar than be month after month be on dating apps and not getting any matches and left feeling like there's something wrong with you, right? And then there's this sanitization I talked about briefly, is we're sanitizing dating so that no one ever feels unsafe or uncomfortable. And this is not just dating, this is life in general, right? We're trying to sanitize it so no one feels unsafe or uncomfortable anymore. But that actually takes away a lot of the opportunities that we would have to actually meet somebody, right? For instance, a good example, I met Orsa, she came on my podcast, right? Now, you could argue that I shouldn't have even tried to have a date with her in some way because that's unprofessional. And that's something that maybe we talk about now, I'm a man, am I in a position of power because I have a podcast and I'm asking her on a date after we've recorded? Have I abused my power in that moment? I don't know. Or, work environments. I know a lot of workplaces are very, very touchy about people dating at work now. Not completely, that's not off limits. That's another example. Or, some women don't want to be approached in the street, right? Or they don't want to be approached in bars and they feel uncomfortable when it happens. So if there's a narrative that's men shouldn't approach women in the street and men shouldn't approach women in bars, which I'm not fully hearing, if I'm honest, out in the world, that creates a situation that women will always feel safe and comfortable, but it will take away the opportunities to meet men, right? So it's I understand the desire for safety and comfort, but we can't sanitize everything so we always feel safe and comfortable, right? Because part of us needs to feel uncomfortable to meet someone new. I used to coach men on, take them out in the streets and help them meet women. And I met one of my girlfriends outside Covent Garden Station. And in the first probably 30 seconds of talking, she felt a bit uncomfortable. I could see it in her face, But after we spoke for a minute and she realized that I was just a perfectly normal guy, I was quite fun, I was quite outgoing, she relaxed and was happy to talk to me, right? It's the same thing in a bar. Whenever you walk up to a woman, often she feels uncomfortable. She's a bit surprised. She's a bit shy, but we can't sanitize the world completely against the feeling of uncomfortability. It's the same where we are looking for ways to be offended as well. So I'm motoring on here because actually I got quite a few notes and so forth about this. And I just think the thing here that he missed out on the podcast is saying to men, here are some things you can do. Here's some things we can do as men, as a society, to start improving men's eligibility in the dating world. Like a really simple one I do with all men I work with, right, is communication, right? Learning how to communicate more powerfully, more openly, more honestly, right? So that you can communicate your points across, so you can get your thoughts into words, because when you get your thoughts into words, someone else can understand them. And this is another thing that I see men time again, is like an inability to really communicate, inability to really emotionally connect, and how to do that. Communication's another one. And also flirting. Flirting's the one that's really lost, I really see with young people, because we spend so much time on our phones and on technology, and flirting is really done best as an in-person activity, right? An in-person activity that is playful, is energetic, is born of presence and awareness of yourself and this other person, and playing with this kind of energy of tension that's in the air. So I feel like I've done a lot. I've said a fair few things there, and I've probably gone over about 10, 15 minutes. I wanted to. But I just want to address this. It's like, if you've listened to this podcast episode, not my one, the one from Chris and Stephen, and felt a bit hopeless about dating, don't. You can make a difference in your dating life. As a man, you can make a huge difference. Get more emotionally intelligent. Speak to more people. Start hitting up some, clubs in your local area, not like nightclubs, like social gatherings, whether it's like a meditation, a breath work thing, or a yoga, or if that's not your jazz, have a look up on some events that happen in your area and start going to them and socializing with people. Get there early, get there 5 minutes early. Say hello to the organizer, say hello to a few people as they come in, ask them how they are, like what brought them there, what they're interested in. Get used to talking to people when you feel afraid and uncomfortable. Get used to socializing with people and start to build up a bank of evidence that it's safe and okay for you to talk to other people, right? Because this is the game changer for men, in my opinion, is like getting more social, getting more emotionally aware, right? Doing some work. Maybe you need to go to therapy. Maybe you need to get a coach, right? Where you start to talk about your emotions, the things that you suppress, the things that you hide and avoid. Learn to express your words, but also your body. Like, how do you feel about moving and dancing? This might seem like so far removed, but I tell you, every man I know who's a very, very proficient communicator, right, will happily move his body and dance on his own or in a group of people, right? Because it's our body. If we can't feel free in our body, how are we going to feel so free to connect with others, right? As well as just learning about women as well, learning how to, not just how to connect to women, but like, what do women deal with, in life? There's plenty of books about women's lives and so forth. And do more in-person dating. Get off the dating apps. Get off the dating apps and start doing more in-person dating is a big, big one I always recommend to guys. So on like in-person dating events, there's plenty of them happening in around the world, around the country. So get more involved in those sorts of things. That's something that Chris said, which I deeply agree with. We do too much online, and the online kind of dating process enables us to screen each other too much, whether that's height, color, education, and so forth. When we're in person, we can feel each other's vibe and energy, and that's a big, big thing that makes us decide whether we want to date someone or not. And then another one of my kind of solutions is learn about sexuality, sexual connection and confidence. Don't just think, oh, I know how to put it in a woman, so I'm all good. Is no, how do you seduce someone in a way that is consensual, is loving, is playful, right? Because this is also a big blocker for men, especially when he talks about the sexless men. But I see men in relationships and men see men dating, because they're not feeling sexually confident. They don't feel happy in dating because they know this is going to lead to sex. So these are some things that you can do individually. And as if you're a man as well, add in, join a men's group. Wherever your local area is, if there's a men's group or a men's retreat, go on it. There's one, and I'll add this into the show notes. There's one run by Men's Circle that's happening in May. I'm doing a little bit of work with Men's Circle in the coming time. I'm actually running a intimacy circle with them next week on the 23rd of April. To come, and we're going to do a men's circle, and the focus is going to be sex and intimacy. It'd be a great thing if you feel uncomfortable with sex and intimacy to sit with a group of men and talk honestly and openly in a safe space about sex. But if you're wanting to connect with people better, join a men's group. Join a men's group where you can talk and you can share and you can listen to other men's problems, because again, it helps you with being more social, right? Like I said, most men's problems when it comes to dating is the lack of experience, the lack of effort, and a lack of being social as well. But this was a quick one, not so quick in the end. Hopefully this is a helpful one. Like I said, I've got nothing against Chris or Stephen. I think they're wonderful men doing great work, and the episode is very, very worth listening to. We've just got to be mindful of how we actually try and help men, and not kind of always put the focus on women succeeding, causing men to fail. It's not binary. It's not either or. We can all succeed. Men and women can both succeed in this world, and it doesn't have to be a binary thing. So, if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody. Let me know. You can find me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_. If these are some topics that you can see that you need help with, dating, connecting better with women, being emotionally more available and open, and being able to be more present with the women you meet, then this is the work that I do. This is what I really focus on with men, and helping them do that and getting them the results that they want in their dating life. So please reach out. You can get me on Instagram, which I just said, but you can also just drop me an email, hello@theauthenticman.net as well.